I'll just say as a start to this news that, my goodness, emotions are very high in this country. And of course, the weekend, a lot of people are focused on London to see what was happening. We've just picked out part of that to comment on, and we've got 3 little video clips to open here, just to have a little look into what was happening around what we might loosely call veterans and what they were doing. Let's have a look at the first clip. Who are these people? Let's just think about what we're seeing here. Now, we obviously played through that little clip twice just to get the effect of the noise, but as I watched it, my mind was taken back to the days when we used to have problems at football matches. I'm not sure who these men are. Are they veterans? Are they not? What was their intent? But just for you, very quickly, Alex, as a quick comment, what was your feeling about what was happening there?
Well, of course, I've been out of the country for 15 years, but I too am put in mind of the 80s, very early 90s. You know, the cries of England, England like that, due to social change and fiddling with people's heads, have just really declined to a fraction of what they were. There's a sense there of recreating an atmosphere of a generation ago. I'm not accusing the men in the picture of anything, but it's something you don't see anymore.
Okay, thank you for that. My final comment on that, of course, is without being there and speaking to some of those people individually, it's difficult to get a feel, but we're just throwing that over to our audience now. Perhaps those sorts of men get accused of things that they're not actually guilty of. Certainly some of the established media tried to say that there was violence at one particular incident against the police, which turned out not to be true. Let's have a look at the clip here.
Shuffle! Come on! No.
Now, the key point here is that some of the mainstream media tried to say that the police were assaulted in that clip, although the clip itself shows the police were pushed aside, but I would say not directly assaulted. So whatever we think about that crowd, their actual actions might have been forceful, but overall we could say they were peaceful. But who are they? What was their real intent in being there? If they were passionate, are their passions justified? Are they frustrated they haven't got a voice? There are many questions to be asked, which of course the established media is not asking. Let's have a look at this wonderful veteran. I don't know this man's name. I'd like to know, but I thought that this was an absolutely fantastic little clip by a veteran.
What a lovely morning in the nation's capital. Just arrived on the train, making my way over to Westminster. Now, if I was here as part of the Free Palestine march, not a problem. But as an ex-serviceman turning up today, I've been labelled as a far-right yob. That's what I've seen in the press this week. If you label me, you negate me. But do you know what? I'm part of the silent majority who is finding a voice, becoming less tolerant of people who are disrespecting my culture, your culture. As an ex-serviceman, I fought for my country. I buried my comrades, and although I'm not a religious person, the Cenotaph to me is about as religious as it gets, and I won't have it touched in any way, shape or form. I won't have it desecrated. That's me.
Alex, can we understand how that man feels? Do we disagree really with what he had to say there?
I cannot disagree with anything that this Welsh veteran says. The Cenotaph, with its 1920 inscription on it, "The Glorious Dead," to my mind, is desecrated by the people in the building slap bang in front of it, the Cabinet Office, the hub of the British government, who commit treason after treason on our armed forces and every other branch of government. But in a secularised and anti-intellectual age that we're now in, for which the media bears much of the culpability, as well as the education system, this veteran is on the button. This is the last vestige of religion we have left, the 11th of November and the nearest Sunday. The Church of England has co-opted it, which is now a godless church. So we've got a shell of national religion. We're now at a very brittle choke point at which we can easily be assaulted and be told by the media in particular which of two opposing camps of alleged yobs to support.
Alex, thank you for that. I'll just highlight, he said at one point, if you label me, you negate me. And of course, this is what is happening across the board. Groups of people who are really concerned for the right things are being labelled. And we're going to suggest later in this news programme that our own government is part of this labelling process. But let's just have a look at how the BBC dealt with matters. And we're being a little bit cynical here, of course, but the picture by the BBC was of fake poppies, and I think that's appropriate for a fake BBC. But here was how some of the reporting went. Sky News put out a breaking where people were supposedly assaulting the police. That was untrue, and that post was deleted. We also had what I've called the Nazi trope here, rise of the new Nazis. So here are people inflaming the whole thing without looking at the wider process. And then this one I've called inflammatory piousness, where we're back to GB News, where we have a spokesman sort of saying that basically no idea why there should be any of this trouble in the world, because of course we, the UK, are doing all the right things. It's all those other nasty people out there. So a little bit of reflection on that. But we also had other social media messages. This is the sort of emotional one for me. The man, obviously in the First World War, nearly at breakdown point. Somebody says this man would have been deemed a far-right racist, and they're absolutely on the button. This is more thoughtful. Somebody is saying maybe it's time to admit we're being governed by criminals. And this one here I'm calling uniform, because what it's really saying is we're right, support our poppies, support our war heroes, but if you're not wearing a poppy, you're not really doing the job. So lots to think about. Now, I tried to go in a different direction over the weekend for the UK column. So I put out a particular tweet. Our viewers will notice that I used the same video clip that I used on Friday. But I said, we remember our own and we remember all those who've died and are dying in conflicts around the world. Surely they would all want the violence and killing to be stopped. And it's our duty to make the peace a reality. Are you strong enough to stand up and call for that peace? And that is the UK column's position. It is peace. We put out the video clip, and we also changed that slightly to reflect it's not just our gardens, the poppies grow in the fields. And I did have some really wonderful feedback. But have a look at this that was posted underneath. Well, first of all, Tommy Robinson appeared on my Twitter feed, if you like. But a particular gentleman here said the British police tried stopping us from getting to the Cenotaph, but we succeeded. He went on to talk about something else. Let's have a look at it. The British are the enemy within. Just look at this. They have destroyed England. I utterly despise them. So I asked this gentleman, who are the British? The next post was the British do not exist. This is a union created by Fabian Tories. So 1 minute it's the enemy within, the next minute they don't exist. So I asked my question again, and of course the response was silence. But what we're seeing here, of course, is deep division being created within our country. And here is the break, British English. What does this really mean? And the only thing I will say is that this particular veteran, I absolutely agree, he's correct that he's seeing that corruption is the problem. Alex, I'm going to pass it back to you, but we've got to be very careful of our time.
Yes, my mind goes back to my native Bedfordshire and the year I left Britain, 2009. Tommy Robinson, whom you mentioned, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, had a core of really concerned people around him at the time. There really were some Luton Pakistani Muslims yelling British soldiers go to hell and desecrating that town's cenotaph and everything that Armistice Day stands for. Whatever happened since shows the co-option of that. But we see the same in the other protests. We see many, very, very many people, as you covered on Friday, very concerned about Israel's strategy and tactics in the Gaza war. And they also are tarred with the same brush as the extremists in the crowd by the media. But let's go on to consider what happened at the Cenotaph. Here we've got Morgoth's review written in the northeast of England by, I would say, the leading ethno-nationalist thinker of roughly my generation. And here he has a very pertinent point to make. He's well aware, not least because of our coverage of Mindspace emanating from that very cabinet office in front of which the Cenotaph is built, for obvious reasons. And he says the British government has been confronted with a rather sticky geopolitical situation. The people who care the most, and of course in the age of caring the most, shouting the loudest, getting the most attention, that's what he's getting on about, the people who care the most about Middle Eastern politics disagree with the geopolitical stance of the government. Well, I would say the lobbyists who control the Cabinet Office, the Ministry of Defense, etc. The left and the Islamic community have taken to the streets in opposition to Israel's highly questionable so-called war in Gaza. He says the situation for the government is uncomfortable. They supported what seemed increasingly like severe human rights abuses and perhaps even genocide, but without any vocal base of support. Now we get to the mind twist, Brian. Let's see what he goes on to say. You could be forgiven, says Morgoth, for thinking that common sense and the British government's usual scant regard for free speech would result in the pro-Palestine march on Saturday simply being banned. Yet the government allowed it to proceed, which is to say they are creating a situation wherein the thing you opened with, Brian, the patriotic counter-protest is guaranteed. They come as if called, as the Dutch idiom would say. I spent much of the last week, says Morgoth, pondering how amazingly convenient this was for the staunchly pro-Israel Conservative Party. Was this an operation? At the same time, the replies to my sceptical utterances on social media were full of such sentiments as, at the end of the day, we just can't be excreted on forever without even protesting about it. That is a fair point. But here's the rub of it from Morgoth. The question fundamentally is whether patriotic British sentiment is being manipulated purposefully, or whether such casual disrespect and indifference to our hallowed days of remembrance is merely part and parcel of living in a vibrant and enriching multicultural society. Of course, as an ethno-nationalist, Morgoth is having a perhaps justified dig at these pious slogans. Yet, he adds, we know that the government engages in nudging and cajoling and behavioural modification, with which he began this piece, to achieve desired outcomes. We live, concludes Morgoth, in a sort of unreality, within a paradigm wherein it is almost impossible to know whether an event or crisis is organic and authentic, or entirely fabricated and manufactured. And he compares the reality of life now with the Truman Show, I'll hand it over to Mark for a brief comment before I go on with my next segment, because I see that he was wanting to come in with thoughts on the Welsh veteran.
I was reminded of a book by Peter Hitchens called The Abolition of Britain. And I was digging through my files and I found a review I wrote for it in an Indiana daily paper back when I was in the conventional press. And I think while I didn't agree with all of Peter Hitchens' points, I think we're seeing some of the main points come true here. It's as if Britain itself is being abolished.
Yes, and again, the time frame for that is about 2009, the time I left GCHQ, and the time that the EDL was set up on perhaps valid concerns. We see a lot of things going back to that time, and of course, it was the time of the changeover from an allegedly socialist government to an allegedly conservative government, about which more anon, because Mr. Cameron features later, who was Prime Minister from 2010 onwards. Well, a very important article indeed, which has gone up on our website, is going to be the feature of the next segment. And I urge our viewers to break the habit, perhaps, of just viewing and really pore over this article, print it out or read it on a device calmly, have it read out to you by somebody or by a computer, and really digest it. He's asking in the Constitution section of our website, which is a unique strength of UK Column, I would say, he's asking regarding war powers, because the next stage is committing troops to Israel, of course. Is the United Kingdom a military dictatorship, or is it a legal limited monarchy? That's not Phil's own phrase. That is straight from the Claim of Rights 1689, the Scottish version of the Bill of Rights, which pointed out that we were a legal limited monarchy, and the last time we had a revolution, it's because the Crown didn't respect it. We'll go to the conclusion of this packed article for the nub of it, which is that a librarian in the House of Commons, and we've covered it many times in the past that the House of Commons Library briefs members of Parliament in untoward ways. The advice given by this librarian, Claire Mills, which is that Parliament has no power in the Constitution over whether to commit troops or withhold that commitment, is disinformation. The impact of this misadvice cannot be overstated in light of the colossal budget of the Ministry of Defence, not in the same league as the Pentagon's, as we got Mark on today, but still a huge amount of money. Phil, having reviewed the evidence from the Constitution in the article, says it is clear, contrary to the House of Commons librarian's briefing, that the Crown's or the government's sole war power prerogative in our day is that it has an obligation to A, repel an invasion of, or B, quell an insurrection within the kingdom or its dominions and territories, not Iraq or Ukraine or Israel. Classically, says Ridley, these twin duties are referred to as the defence of the realm and keeping the king's peace, respectively, and they correspond with the mention in US oaths of office of constitutional enemies, foreign and domestic. The British Constitution then requires that the Crown, His Majesty's government, must refer back to Parliament for its consent if any operations go beyond what is strictly necessary once peace for the British people, not the people of Gaza or Israel, has been restored. In the meat of the piece, further towards the top, we see the historical grievance regarding James VII and II. The quotation at the top there is from the Claim of Rights, saying that James and his government, because of the lack of parliamentary involvement in war, had, and indeed peace at home, had altered Britain from a legal limited monarchy to an arbitrary despotic power. And when William III came to address that and kick James out, and become the new king on invitation of the Lords, he said in his declaration of reason, his rationale for coming over, that James, if left in power, might be in a capacity to maintain and execute his government's wicked designs by the assistance of the army and thereby to enslave the nation. Philip Ridley says that this is no hypothetical risk because of the 77th Brigade shenanigans that we've seen, where a scandal is created, spying on members of Parliament leads to a situation where their foibles are elucidated in public. And then along comes the same man, Elwood, who was then chairing the Defence Committee, saying what we need is military government in response. So here's the real key point here. Print out, please, in particular, this bit, and pick one piece from this section that Philip Ridley has carefully put together with his expertise and write to your Member of Parliament about that one. Don't put too many points in it, just one at a time. He says that, for example, we could go back to a yearly Armed Forces Act so that Parliament, not just once every 5 years, but once every year, as it constitutionally and historically did, scrutinises what the 46 billion pounds of our military budget, a sixth of our income tax, is going on. He says Parliament could legislate or rather make better use of its Defence Committee. It could have subcommittees looking at nefarious areas of warfare rather than just one big blob in the Defence Committee itself. He says that Parliament should be asking about robotics and artificial intelligence and space weapons. Now, with China and Israel getting in on the act, we are in the age of space weapons, let alone the US Space Force, which is very secretive about what it does. But Britain's in there too. Phil says, crucially, that only Parliament, forget what their librarians tell you, which is proven wrong in this article, only Parliament can carry out this scrutiny, because it's by statute, which is Parliament's domain, that we have classification of state secrets. Parliament can overrule a classification, set it aside, quote things in Parliament with the Speaker's permission without being tried for giving away state secrets. And he points out that 77th Brigade's role was exposed largely by UK column, and that this may have led to Tobias Ellwood resigning from that role on the committee. So plenty of detail there that needs to be got out. And I just implore people to select one of those points and ask their member of Parliament, why aren't you doing this? And don't be satisfied with a fob off. As we often say, go to the constituency chairman or chairwoman of their party that put them in the post if they tell you to get lost or don't reply, and say, I am not satisfied with this failure to engage with the electorate.
Alex, thank you very much. Did you have one further? I think you had one further slide to cover.
Yes, this is quite important too. Nobody will confirm nor deny, says Phil Ridley, whether Ellwood was in active service with the army when he was chairing the Parliament Defence Committee. And this reminds us of Mike Robinson's opinion piece. I think it's still on the homepage under Editor's Choice. Members of Parliament are not entitled to a private public life. This is another of the things that we'll be told, go away. What our defence ministers and members of Parliament do behind your back is none of your concern in foreign combinations. Read Phil Ridley's article. There's enough historical precedent to show that up for the bunk that it is.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much.